Pilot this jet and win my hand. Millionaire taunts black cleaner, but her secret stuns him. The runway glowed in late sunlight as a private jet purred like a promise. Workers rolled carts, cameras blinked, and a small cluster of guests waited for a man who loved being watched. His attention was fixed on a black woman in a navy jumpsuit, gloved hands steady around a mop handle, posture straight enough to look like defiance. A challenge traveled through the crowd and landed at her feet as if it were a dare wrapped in a compliment. Laughter followed, the kind that bites and pretends it's playful. No one expected the evening to pivot on a single decision. No one knew she had spent years preparing for a moment just like this. The airport belonged to a man who measured worth in engines, square footage, and applause. His name filled magazine profiles and dinner speeches. He liked to host charity flights that doubled as informal auditions for loyalty. Staff learned to avoid his spotlight. It always felt like standing on a trap door. The woman in the jumpsuit moved differently. She arrived before dawn, checked fuel smell corners others ignored, and walked with the quiet precision of someone who believed details saved lives. Her name badge carried a corporate alias, the kind issued to temporary workers the system calls invisible. She logged overtime for reasons no one asked about and paid tuition for classes no one saw. Guests noticed surface facts. They saw a uniform, not the posture of someone who had drilled emergency procedures until muscle memory turned into instinct. They saw a cleaner's cart, not the FAA textbooks tucked into a backpack with worn corners and underlined pages. They saw gloved hands, not the flight hours earned already, the provisional licenses, the simulators rented on weekends, the nights studying meteorology charts in a studio apartment that smelled like detergent and coffee. A rumor often travels faster than a jet. Someone said the boss had a new game, a bet dressed up as philanthropy. A challenge that awarded a prize if a random person could meet an impossible standard. It landed on her because prejudice enjoys theatrics. The line arrived like a hook cast into a crowd. If she could pilot the jet perfectly, some grand promise would follow. The words were framed as encouragement but soaked in condescension. People grinned. Phones lifted. A narrative formed without her consent. She was expected to laugh, to retreat, to remain in the role assigned by people who never learned her history. She did not step back. The hangar air carried that blend of fuel, rubber and dust that marks the threshold between earth and distance. She stood in the center of it, symmetry in steel and arrogance around her, and took inventory, not of the people or their smirks, but of the machine. She cataloged the model's quirks from memory, the way the nose lifts, the temperament of the engines, the weight bias when fully fueled, the emergency shutoff hidden like a secret every pilot knows to touch twice. The man's crowd expected a spectacle. The woman respected procedures. She asked for a pre-flight inspection log. A technician blinked, surprised to be addressed like a peer by someone he had only ever seen with a mop bucket. He handed it over. She traced inked check marks with a gloved finger and spotted what was missing. A hydraulic line inspection had been signed by a junior who often rushed. She requested a visual confirmation. The technician hesitated, then complied. The line showed early fraying under a clamp. Nothing catastrophic yet. A risk if ignored. Whispers traveled faster than wrenches. The crowd's smirks softened to curiosity. The boss waved a hand, amused but impatient. The woman kept going. She walked the fuselage like reading Braille, eyes and hands finding the silent story of a machine's day. She checked tire pressure with a gauge she carried because she never assumed someone else's honesty. She looked at the weather report. She studied the windsocks. She memorized departures and arrivals to avoid traffic conflicts. It looked like fussiness. It was competence measured in quiet choices. Security gathered near the steps. Cameras angled for the best shot of failure. The woman's breath steadied the way it had countless nights in a simulator when a virtual voice announced an engine flame out and a digital sky narrowed to a window of survival. People around her debated motives. Some called the challenge harmless fun. Others named it what it was, a performance built on the assumption that some people exist to be tested publicly, that humiliation can be repackaged as opportunity. No one wondered whether this moment forced her to relive every door that had quietly shut in her face, application portals that never pinged back, Interview rooms that praised her poise and then hired someone who looked like the last 10 hires. Scholarship committees that said almost, "Injustice often wears a neat tie and a smile." She thought about her mother's hands, rough from work, gentle on a Bible. About a scholarship that covered books but not fuel. About a mentor who had quietly paid for simulator time and said, in the language of checklists and caution lights, that persistence is a runway too. A regulator from the charity board stepped forward to make it official. The terms were televised ego. If she could start, taxi, take off, circle the city within a defined airspace, and land without passenger discomfort or instrument deviation. The boss would fund a pilot training cohort for underrepresented students and sponsor her final certification costs. The wording felt generous. The intent felt performative. But the outcomes, if reached, could be real. She agreed with a nod. Not to entertain a wealthy stranger, but to open a door wide enough that others could walk through after her. She requested a co-pilot for safety. The boss smirked. The regulator insisted. A senior pilot with a reputation for fairness volunteered. He watched her prep and recognized the signature of someone who doesn't rush checklists. A quiet respect settled between professionals. The cabin was filled with observers who had never seen prejudice try to bargain with expertise. The woman strapped in, hands hovering over controls she knew like the layout of her apartment's single room. She did not perform for the cameras. She tested flaps, listened to the engine's tone, and felt the seat vibrate the way a healthy plane hums when it's ready. She called for clearance with a voice even and low. She rolled forward, followed the green centerline lights, and treated every foot like a rehearsal of the life she wanted. Outside, the crowd waited for the spectacle. Inside, competence is prepared to erase a script written by arrogance. The takeoff roll began as a slow confession of power. Throttle forward. Instruments alive. Airspeed alive. Rotate at the number she carried like a prayer. The nose lifted and the runway fell away, a slab of doubt sliding behind them. The city opened beneath in grids and rivers. The jet climbed into clean air. At 3,000 feet, the first jolt arrived. A caution light winked for hydraulic pressure. Not catastrophic. Not ignorable. The co-pilot glanced over. She had already trimmed slightly to compensate. She requested a hold at a higher altitude and leveled off, conserving what they had. Her mind ran parallel checklists, one practical, one emotional. Practical said monitor, reduce unnecessary control movements, plan for a longer final. Emotionally said this is the exact kind of inconvenience a crowd will label as evidence rather than environment. Wind shifted. The sun angled lower, throwing glare off a shallow layer of haze. She adjusted the heading 2 degrees for a smoother approach path later. Air traffic control asked if they wished to return immediately. She requested a circuit within the approved airspace to keep systems stable and investigate. Each choice folded the odds in her favor like paper turned into an airfoil. The approach began. She briefed the landing with the calm of someone who has felt fear and learned to negotiate with it. Flaps incrementally, not aggressively. Speed a hair above normal to reduce control load. Aim long to give time for a gentle flare. The co-pilot watched her hands. Not a tremor. The runway grew from a ribbon to a road to a destination. The jet descended through the last 1,000 feet. She adjusted for crosswind without drama. The hydraulic caution stayed, a yellow whisper rather than a red scream. She kept the nose true, eased power, and let the main wheels find the earth like a memory returning. The tires kissed asphalt with a softness the crowd later called impossible. Spoilers deployed, brakes engaged with controlled pressure. The jet slowed in a straight line, a poem written in physics and discipline. Silence landed with them. Not the awkward kind that follows a failed joke. The reverent kind that follows proof. On the tarmac, the evening had shifted from spectacle to witness. Workers who knew the unseen labor of safety exchanged glances that said, finally. The crowd's earlier smirks had dissolved into the kind of curiosity that arrives too late. The regulator marked the performance as compliant. The senior pilot offered a handshake that meant welcome. The cameras recorded faces recalibrating. The man who staged the challenge tried to convert disbelief into magnanimity. He moved toward the microphones to narrate his shock as generosity, as if his surprise deserved applause. The narrative slipped from his grip. The woman's competence had redrawn the frame. The event was no longer about the charm of a bet. It was about the cost of a world that requires excellence to show paperwork before it's believed.